And then you see headlines talking about these large corporations that own all these residential properties. Well, their rent is on the decline. Well, no shit, your rent's on the decline, man. Your homes look terrible. Folks, it's Texas. Just that camera right there. And allergies are just in full swing. So if you can sit with me for a few minutes here, I'm going to sip on some hot coffee, try not to clear my throat too much, and I want to answer some questions that I've been getting in regards to foreclosures, interest rates, what the housing market's going to do, is the market going to crash, what the heck is going on. Foreclosures are not happening in the way that a lot of people think. Right now, I've had quite a few people talk to me about foreclosures. And in fact, I was doing an open house this past weekend, and a phenomenal turnout, which was great because I always get to have conversations from people all over the United States that are moving here. And you sure wouldn't know the housing market was on a downward trajectory, supposedly, by the amount of people that were in this open house. But I had two different groups come through, and they asked me a question about foreclosures. Or at least we started having a conversation about foreclosures. And I asked this one husband and wife, I said, well, what makes you think that we're going to see so many foreclosures to the point that you should wait to buy a home because you're trying to get ready for an opportunity for all these foreclosures to hit the market? And she said, well, I read that in 2021, there was from 2021 to 2022, there was a massive increase in foreclosures. She said like 80 something percent. And I explained to her, and she also mentioned that, from 2022 to 2023, there was also another massive increase in foreclosures. And I said, hey, I don't remember the numbers off of the top of my head, but do you remember the actual number of foreclosures, not the percentage of increase? She didn't know. I said, well, here's the deal. I said, go back and look. Pre-pandemic, pre-2021 numbers of foreclosures, and then today number of foreclosures. So here's the numbers right here. Most people didn't really think that the market was going to crash. And let's say from 2013 to, let's just say 2018. And look at the number of foreclosures. So let's start out at 2018. There's a little over 360,000 foreclosures. 2019, there's a little under 300,000 foreclosures. In 2020, 165. And in 2021, we had 65,000 foreclosures. And then in 2022, it goes up to just a little over 164,000. Now, if I say foreclosures in America went up 80 something percent, that sounds scary. If I said, you know what? And in 2021, we had historical low foreclosure rates because of the pandemic. We had 65,000 foreclosures. And in 2022, we did go up quite a percentage-wise. But folks, it's still relatively low considering. Same for 2023. So I don't believe we're going to see a lot of foreclosures. Interest rates, that's another question and concern on basically everybody's mind right now. And the high interest rates is what's causing the prices to stay where they are and even go up. And it's also causing the low inventory. But a lot of people are concerned, when is interest rates actually going to start coming down? And I genuinely don't believe that we're going to see interest rates truly come down until probably August of 2024. Now, there's a few different reasons why I say this, but one of the main ones is Powell said last September exactly what their plans were. He said, our goal is to keep an eye on inflation and the economy, and as long as everything moves in the trajectory that we think it's going to go, then we plan to do a series of 3 rate reductions starting in Q3 of 2024. Now, maybe it's a coincidence that it's an election year, but it does seem awfully coincidental that they might do a reduction in do a reduction in August, September, and October. Like I said. So 1, he said they were going to do that. 2, it sure does align well for an election year. And then 3, another thing that Powell said, he said that they would talk about lowering the interest rates, they would see how the market reflects on that, and then they would make that determining factor. So when there's about to be a Fed report coming out, and you have all this economists coming out and saying, oh, there's an 80%, there's a 90% chance the Fed's going to reduce the interest rates, and then you see the economy bounce up pretty quickly, which is going to affect inflation, then the Fed says, it's a little too early. They bounce back a little too quick. We have to hurt the economy so we can get the inflation down. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think they're going to wait too long, and it is going to hurt the market, but I don't think it's going to hurt housing for a while, and I think they will correct it so it won't actually hurt the housing market, but it is going to cause a significant amount of pain and discomfort to some people. But overall, the high interest rates, I don't think are going to crash the market unless they wait way, way too long, because the high interest rate is going to keep the inventory low. The real estate market crash. Well, let's take a second and really dive into what that means. So when I hear people, whether I'm looking online or talking to folks in person, when I hear real estate market, most people are using housing market and real estate market like they're the same thing. A lot of times when you hear this, if you read or you listen to what the person's talking about, they're going to mention quite often when they're talking about a crash, they're going to be talking about commercial properties. And in short, it's just because there's still a lot of people working from home. As that weans off, like we've seen in other countries, you're going to see those vacancies start to fill up. And I really think the commercial sector will rebound relatively well. But there is the fact of, e-commerce has really affected, commercial store frontage. And that's just something that is, I think, just inevitably going to happen as more and more people buy things off the internet. Now, let's take a look at the real estate as in regards to 1 to 4 family residential properties. So with the high interest rates, if these interest rates continue to stay high, sooner or later it will cause a crash. But I think for a fair amount of time, I would say at least for the rest of this year and into next year, pending how hard things do get, you're not going to see just a flood of homes on the market because people are sitting on a lot of equity and they have the ability to do a cash out refi or open up a HELOC or do something like that to where they're not needing to sell their property. Another thing is most people are sitting on a ton of equity. So let's say you're a homeowner and times are tough and you need to take some money out of your home equity. You're not going to take out all of it in most cases. You're just going to take out some of it. And most people are sitting on so much equity that let's say they take a chunk of that equity out and they do a HELOC or something. And then fast forward to next year and they're still sitting on hard times. Or maybe fast forward to the end of this year and they're still sitting on hard times. Let's say they bought that home years ago for $300,000 and now the home's worth $650,000. They do a $50,000 HELOC on the property. Fast forward, they're still hitting hard times. They've both, husband and wife, lost their job. Everything's falling apart. Oh, honey, we have to sell the home. I know, I don't want to sell the home. We'll never be able to get this interest rate. This is so terrible. My heart is broken. This home has been this is our home. We love it. There's so much pain and sadness that goes into a foreclosure, but they won't have to go into a foreclosure. They bought the home years ago for $300,000. And now it's worth $650,000. Let's say the market drops. They took the HELOC out for $50,000. The market drops down to $550,000. They could still sell the home and they have equity. Let's say the home drops to $500,000. They still have equity they can sell. They don't have to foreclose on. And the likelihood of the market crashing to the point where the real value of that home dropping to the point where these people don't have the equity unless they've pulled just a ton out of it, which most people aren't going to do, especially if you've lost your jobs because you have to qualify for your HELOC. They're going to have equity and they don't have to foreclose. So you're not going to see that cause it. There is something else, though, that makes me slightly nervous, and that's going to be the rental market. So let's talk about that in a little bit of detail. I've been reading more and more headlines talking about how the rental market the rent values are decreasing, landlords are struggling to turn profits on the property, interest rates are going to go up, therefore all these investors are going to have to start dropping their homes on the market. That's a real possibility. That is something that could potentially happen, especially when you're looking at these large firms. However, I try not to be conspiracy theory sounding on this one, but there was a World Economic Forum that came out years ago and said, you'll own nothing and be happy. And I can't help but see a lot of the stuff that's happening right now. And it almost seems like it's trying to force the small man out of the investor aspect of things, someone like me owning rental properties, and forcing it into the hands of large hedge fund companies. However, there's a bit of a problem, I think, with these large hedge fund style rental owned property situations. And this is anecdotal, so take it with a grain of salt, but I believe it to be an accurate statement. Let's just say, I'll use my grandma, for example. And at one point, she owned a dozen rental properties. Now, she took care of those rental properties and everything was nice. And, she had some renters that were tough and she had some renters that were great. And then over time, she got older and then she died. And then the homes were sold before she died to pay for her living expenses in her later years. So those homes go back on the market. The problem is with these hedge fund situations is those homes are never going to go back on the market. Now, a lot of times I've noticed whenever a rental property is sold, whether it's a new landlord or an individual that buys it for themselves as a rental property or even for their own personal home, when it changes ownerships, oftentimes those homes are fixed up. And then they go back on the market and they're able to rent. So you kind of have this natural cycle where the homes just kind of are forced to get fixed up. But what you see with these corporations is they're not wanting to sell the properties because, they make money off of them. And it doesn't matter if somebody dies because it's a corporation. But the problem is because those properties they never change ownership, then they're less inclined to get updated. Now, if you go online, and just for S&Gs, I went out one day and looked at a few rental properties because I've been hearing this from folks. And they were right. There are properties out there that are asking an astronomical amount of money for the rent. And you go in these homes, they need new carpet, they need paint, they need texture work, they need new countertops, the cabinets are beat up. And these are homes that are renting from like $200 to $2,500 a month. The yards look terrible, the bushes are not in good shape. Like the homes are dilapidated. So in that scenario, let's just say this company, let's call it Banana Investment LLC. And Banana LLC has 100 rental properties in Denton County. And they're not taking care of these properties. The renters are getting frustrated beyond belief because nothing gets fixed. The homes aren't taken care of. They can't get a hold of anybody. The management company is rude to them. A lot of times you're working with somebody that English is not their first language, so that creates some frustration with the renters. These are just conversations I've had with people, by the way. Don't get mad at me for what I'm saying. This is just what I've heard. So all this is happening, which is making people want to buy homes, but there's no inventory. And then they go to apartments or something of that nature. And then renters start getting more and more frustrated because they don't want to rent these properties. And then you see headlines talking about these large corporations that own all these residential properties. Well, their rent is on the decline. Well, no shit, your rent's on the decline, man. Your homes look terrible. And you're hard to work with and you don't take care of your renters and word's getting out. So whenever I put up one of my rental properties, that's a question I get. I'm asked as the listing agent. Is this managed by a local company or is the owner overseas or is the owner a corporation or something like that? These are questions. I don't work with a lot of renters, but these are the questions that renters are asking now because they're hearing stories from their friends. So like I said, it's anecdotal in nature, but I think it's truthful in fact, the fact that if you have these large corporations that own a ton of rental properties, that means you have a ton of rental properties out there that aren't being taken care of. Therefore, they're dragging the overall value down of the rental market. But if you have a rental market and it looks nice and it's taken care of, you're probably still going to be able to rent it out for a really good amount because it's such a diamond in the rough right now. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is, if these corporations get to the point where they're not cash flowing on these properties because our local governments are so hell-bent on taxing the bejesus out of landlords, then that could cause a problem because they're going to start selling these dilapidated properties. And if you're a company that doesn't have a fundamental desire to do good things for America, then you're just going to dump them on the property. And I think that potentially could cause some problems because when you look at most Texas counties, the owner occupancy level is higher on the renter side, meaning there's more landlords that own properties than there's individuals that own properties. So if you start seeing a lot of these rental properties getting dumped on the market, that could cause some problems. However, on the other side of the coin, there's still so many people that are trying to buy homes that those homes, I think, are going to get sucked up off the market. So it's going to take a while, and it's going to take a lot of those properties. And that leads me back into what I was talking about earlier. Depending on how you're looking at it, this is one video or a series of videos. But I just don't see enough dominoes that are going to fall to cause an overall housing market crash. But this one, the rental or the non-owner occupancy properties, that is something that does concern me. And I think that does have the potential to cause the biggest problem in our housing market. But who knows? Time will tell on that one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the video. I hope you got some value out of it. I hope it answered some questions and maybe eased some of the concern that I'm hearing with people when I'm having these conversations. So these allergies, I can barely breathe through my nose. So until next time, I hope y'all have a great day.